Hey there, it's Karenology. If you think you've heard it all, wait until you hear this wild story.
It all started with a simple wooden fence. I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood, hoping to leave the chaos of my old life behind. The house was a fixer-upper, but it had charm, a big backyard with an old oak tree, plenty of space for my dog, and enough privacy to finally breathe, or so I thought. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter from the homeowner association. It arrived just a week after I installed the fence. The letter was polite but firm. Your recent addition of a wooden fence violates community aesthetic standards and must be removed within 14 days, and I couldn't believe it. The fence was well within my property lines and matched the neighborhood's style. Besides, no one had said anything during the weeks it took to build it. I decided to attend the next homeowner association meeting to sort things out. The president, Paul Rivers, was a man who clearly enjoyed his authority. He sat at the head of the table in a crisp suit, flanked by other board members, including Karen Larson, a neighbor who seemed to have an opinion about everything. Her glare made it clear she wasn't a fan of mine. "Mr. Bennett," Paul began, his tone condescending, "you violated Section 4.3 of the community guidelines. Fences require prior approval, which you did not seek." "I read the guideline," I countered. "They only mention approval for fences over 6 feet tall. Mine is 5 feet and completely within code." Paul's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Regardless, the fence disrupts the uniform aesthetic of the community. You'll need to remove it." Karen chimed in, her voice dripping with mock concern. "It's not just the aesthetics. Your fence blocks the view of the greenbelt. It's selfish, really." I clenched my jaw but stayed calm. "The greenbelt is on my property. I'm not blocking anyone's access. Besides, I installed the fence because stray dogs were getting into my yard." Paul leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "If you don't comply, we'll be forced to take legal action." "Legal action? Over a fence?" I left the meeting fuming, but determined. This was my property and I had every right to protect it. The next morning I woke to find a new notice taped to my door. This one was less polite. "Cease and desist all activities related to the unauthorized fence. Non-compliance will result in daily fines of $100. I called a lawyer. He confirmed that the homeowner association didn't have the authority to fine me without proper due process. Armed with this information, I sent a formal letter disputing their claims and refused to take down the fence. That's when the real harassment began. It started small. A garbage truck accidentally skipped my house, leaving my trash to pile up for weeks. My mailbox was mysteriously knocked over. Then late one night, I heard a commotion outside. I stepped out to find Karen and 2 other neighbors dismantling part of my fence. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, rushing toward them. Karen didn't even flinch. "This fence is illegal. We're just enforcing community standards." "Get off my property," I barked, pulling out my phone to record the scene. The other 2 hesitated, but Karen stood her ground, her smug expression unshaken. The next day, I installed security cameras. If they were going to harass me, I'd make sure there was evidence. A week later, things escalated further. My water and electricity were suddenly shut off. When I called the utility companies, they claimed I had requested the disconnections. I spent hours on the phone proving otherwise. It was clear someone in the homeowner association had tampered with my accounts. I filed a police report, but the officer who came to my house seemed reluctant to get involved. "It's a civil matter," he said with a shrug. "You'll have to take it up with the association." Frustrated but not defeated, I decided to fight fire with fire. I dug deeper into the homeowner association's records and discovered something interesting. Paul Rivers owned shares in a local construction company, a company that conveniently won every contract for community improvements. I wasn't sure how it all connected yet, but I had a feeling my fence was just an excuse to push me out. If they succeeded, they'd probably develop my land into something profitable. It was a classic power play, and I wasn't about to let them win. Then came the lawsuit. A thick envelope arrived at my door, notifying me that the homeowner association was suing me for violating community standards and creating a public nuisance. They demanded I not only remove the fence, but also pay thousands in damages for disrupting community harmony. I stood on my porch, clutching the papers, as a storm brewed overhead. They wanted a fight? Fine. They were about to get one. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal document, it was a declaration of war. I sat at my kitchen table, the stack of papers spread out in front of me. Each line was a reminder of how far the homeowner association was willing to go to enforce their will. My lawyer, Sarah, had already warned me this was going to get messy. "They're trying to bury you in legal fees," she explained during our last meeting. "They don't expect you to fight back. Most people cave under the pressure." But I wasn't most people. I'd spent years in high-pressure situations as a firefighter, facing challenges that most would run from. This was just another battle, different but no less important. Sarah helped me draft a counterclaim, asserting my rights as a property owner and accusing the homeowner association of harassment. She also recommended I start documenting everything, every interaction, every notice, every suspicious occurrence. The cameras I installed had already captured Karen and her friends dismantling my fence, and I was sure there'd be more evidence to come. As the weeks passed, the tension in the neighborhood grew palpable. Karen's glares became more frequent, and I noticed a few other neighbors avoiding me altogether. It was clear lines were being drawn. Some supported the homeowner association, either out of fear or allegiance, while others quietly expressed their sympathy. One neighbor, an older man named George, even slipped me a note one evening. "Hang in there," it read. "Not everyone agrees with them. They've been bullying people for years." The note was a small comfort, but it also confirmed what I'd suspected. Paul Rivers and his cronies were used to getting their way. This wasn't just about my fence. It was about control. Then one night, things escalated again. I was woken by the sound of shattering glass. Rushing downstairs, I found a brick lying in the middle of my living room floor, surrounded by shards from my broken window. Attached to the brick was a note: "Get out while you still can." The police arrived quickly, but their response was disappointingly passive. "No cameras caught who did it," the officer said with a shrug. "Without evidence, there's not much we can do." It was infuriating. They were treating this as just another neighborhood spat, not the calculated campaign of intimidation it clearly was. But if they thought this would scare me off, they were wrong. I replaced the window the next day and doubled down on security, adding more cameras and motion-activated lights. Meanwhile, Sarah's investigations were turning up more dirt on Paul Rivers. She discovered that his construction company had a history of questionable practices, including overcharging for community projects and pocketing the difference. It was no coincidence that he wanted me out. My land was valuable, and my refusal to back down was a threat to his plans. As the court date approached, the homeowner association ramped up their pressure. They sent me multiple fines for violations, ranging from having unapproved landscaping to leaving my garbage bins out too long. It was petty and transparent, but it added to the stress. Then came the final straw. I returned home one afternoon to find a team of workers on my property, tearing down my fence. Paul Rivers stood nearby, overseeing the operation with a smug expression. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, marching up to him. "You were given ample notice," Paul replied coolly. "The fence is a violation, and we're removing it as per community guidelines." "This is illegal," I shot back. "You have no right to be on my property." Paul smirked. "We'll let the court decide that." I recorded the entire exchange, making sure to capture every word. Then I called the police, who arrived just as the workers were finishing. While they couldn't stop the destruction already done, they did force Paul and his crew to leave. It was a small victory, but it felt hollow as I stared at the wreckage of my fence. That night I sat down with Sarah to strategize. The case was no longer just about a fence. It was about exposing the corruption and abuse of power that had festered in the homeowner association for years. Paul and Karen thought they could bully me into submission, but they had underestimated just how far I was willing to go to fight for what was right. The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. The morning after the fence debacle, I woke up to find a fresh wave of harassment waiting for me. My driveway was blocked by a massive pile of gravel, deliberately dumped there overnight. A crudely written note taped to my front door read, "Community Improvement Project. Kindly cooperate." It was signed by Paul Rivers with the official homeowner association letterhead. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a deliberate attempt to provoke me. I snapped pictures of the scene and called Sarah. "This is getting out of hand," I said, pacing my kitchen. "They're escalating, and I need to hit back harder." "We will," Sarah assured me, "but we need to be smart. Don't give them any ammunition to use against you." That afternoon, I rented a truck and spent hours clearing the gravel myself. As I worked, neighbors watched from their windows, some curious, others clearly enjoying the spectacle. Karen even stood on her porch, arms crossed, smirking as I shoveled. I ignored her, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Later that evening, I received a call from George, the older neighbor who had slipped me the supportive note. "I've been in this neighborhood for 20 years, he began, his voice heavy with resignation. "Paul and Karen have run the homeowner association like their personal kingdom. They intimidate anyone who gets in their way." "Why hasn't anyone stood up to them?" I asked. "Most people can't afford the fight," George replied. "But you've already shown you're not like most people. If anyone can take them down, it's you." His words bolstered my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had been bullied into silence. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah filed a motion to dismiss the homeowner association's lawsuit, citing their repeated harassment and lack of legal grounds. At the same time, I reached out to a local investigative journalist, hoping to shine a light on the corruption within the association. The journalist, a sharp-witted woman named Lisa, was immediately intrigued. "This could be a big story," Lisa said during our first meeting. "People love a David versus Goliath narrative, especially when it involves abuse of power. But I'll need solid evidence." I handed over the footage from my security cameras, the fines and the bogus notices. Lisa promised to dig deeper, focusing on Paul's ties to the construction company and any other skeletons in his closet. As I waited for the court hearing, the homeowner association continued their campaign of intimidation. My lawn was mysteriously sprayed with herbicide, killing patches of grass. Flyers accusing me of being a troublemaker and anti-community were distributed throughout the neighborhood. One evening, I caught Karen snapping pictures of my house from the street, no doubt looking for more violations. But their tactics were starting to backfire. The journalist's investigation was gaining traction, and whispers of dissent were spreading among the neighbors. George introduced me to a few other residents who were fed up with the homeowner association's antics. Together, we formed a small but determined group, sharing stories and strategizing ways to expose the corruption. The turning point came during the court hearing. Sarah was relentless, systematically dismantling the homeowner association's claims. She presented evidence of their harassment, including the footage of Karen and the others tearing down my fence, as well as the records of fines and notices sent without proper authority. The judge seemed increasingly unimpressed with Paul's smug demeanor and evasive answers. Then Sarah dropped the bombshell: documentation of financial irregularities within the homeowner association. Lisa's investigation had uncovered that Paul had been funneling community funds into his construction company, using inflated invoices and bogus projects to line his pockets. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as the evidence was presented. Paul's confident facade cracked. He stammered through his responses, unable to explain away the discrepancies. By the end of the hearing, the judge had not only dismissed the lawsuit, but also ordered an independent audit of the homeowner association's finances. Outside the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The fight wasn't over, but this was a major victory. Neighbors who had once avoided me now approached with words of support, emboldened by the cracks in Paul's armor. Even George, who had always seemed cautious, smiled and clapped me on the back. As I stood on my porch that evening, watching the sunset, I knew the battle was far from finished. Paul and Karen wouldn't go down without a fight, and the audit would likely uncover even more skeletons. But for the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about justice, about standing up to bullies, and about reclaiming the community from those who had hijacked it for their own gain. The days following the court hearing were a whirlwind. The news of the judge's ruling spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and the fallout for Paul Rivers and the homeowner association was immediate. The independent audit ordered by the court uncovered a tangled web of financial corruption, implicating not just Paul, but also several other board members. They had been using association funds to pay for personal expenses and funneling money through Paul's construction company for projects that either never happened or were grossly overpriced. The revelations sparked outrage. A special meeting of the homeowner association was called, and for the first time, the residents, many of whom had remained silent out of fear or apathy, showed up in force. The meeting was held in the community center, a modest building that was now packed to capacity with angry homeowners demanding answers. I stood near the back, observing the chaos as Paul tried to maintain control. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a desperate, almost pleading tone. "We acted in the best interests of the community," he insisted, his voice barely audible over the shouting. Karen Larson, ever the loyal enforcer, tried to deflect the blame onto me. "This all started because of that fence," she snapped, pointing a finger in my direction. "He's been nothing but trouble since he moved in." The crowd wasn't buying it. "What about the missing funds?" someone shouted. "Where's the money, Paul?" another demanded. Paul's attempts to dodge the questions only fueled the anger. Finally, George, the elderly neighbor who had been quietly supporting me, stood up and addressed the room. "This isn't about a fence," he said firmly. "It's about a group of people who thought they could exploit this community for their own gain. Well, we're done letting them get away with it." The room erupted in applause. It was a turning point, a moment when the tide definitively turned against Paul and his cronies. By the end of the meeting, a vote of no confidence had been passed, effectively removing Paul, Karen, and the other implicated board members from their positions. A temporary committee was formed to oversee the homeowner association until new elections could be held. Despite the victory, I knew my fight wasn't entirely over. Paul and Karen weren't the type to go quietly. True to form, they continued their campaign of harassment, this time in subtler ways. Anonymous complaints about my property flooded City Hall, and I started receiving letters from a lawyer representing Paul, threatening further legal action. But I was ready for them. Lisa, the investigative journalist, had turned the story into a series of articles that gained significant traction in the local media. Public opinion was firmly on my side, and the more Paul and Karen tried to retaliate, the worse they looked. One night, as I was reviewing documents with Sarah, she looked up and smiled. "You know, you've done more than just win a case," she said. "You've changed this neighborhood." Her words stuck with me. It wasn't just about the fence or even the corruption. It was about standing up to a system that thrived on intimidation and silence. My neighbors, once divided and fearful, were now united and determined to rebuild their community on a foundation of transparency and fairness. In the weeks that followed, the new committee began implementing reforms. Financial records were made publicly accessible, and decisions were subjected to community votes. For the first time, residents felt like they had a voice. George even joked that he might run for president, a suggestion that was met with enthusiastic support. As for Paul and Karen, their influence evaporated almost overnight. Paul's construction company lost its contracts, and Karen's reputation in the neighborhood was in shambles. They both eventually moved away, their departure met with a collective sigh of relief. One afternoon, as I was repairing the last section of my fence, George walked over with a smile. "Looks good," he said, nodding at the sturdy wooden panels. "You've earned it." I leaned on my hammer and looked around. The street felt different now, more alive and welcoming. Kids played on the sidewalks, neighbors chatted over their fences, and the tension that had once hung in the air was gone. "We all earned it," I replied. It wasn't the ending I had expected when this whole ordeal began, but it was the one we needed. Together, we had reclaimed our neighborhood and reminded everyone that even the smallest voices can make a difference when they refuse to be silenced.